Layer of white snow is all that illuminates the dark of night, and it crunches underneath her feet as she approaches the grey wooden villa on top of the hill. She thinks about the text message she received earlier. The first one is a must. The second is to show your love. It is a text message directly from God, and she knows what she has to do. She pulls out the revolver, a Smith & Wesson 36-1, as she gets close to the porch. The door is missing its handle and she pushes it open. She's been living in this house for 3 years and quickly finds her way up the stairs in the dark towards her first victim. On a cold January night, Sarah Svensson kills 2 people in a small congregational village called Knutby. She does this because she received messages straight from the God on her phone. But actually, these messages were sent by a pastor, Helge Fossmo. This will be the story of a pastor who had mistresses. Moreover, he managed to make one of those mistresses to kill in the name of God. So let's dive into this mini cult true crime story of Helge Fossmo. And there's even more than him. Hello, my friends. Before we start to dive into today's video, just wanted to remind you that you can also support my channel by subscribing, writing down a comment, sharing this video with whoever would be interested in listening or watching these stories. And there's a new thing. Now you can join a membership, and this means that you will just pay like a very symbolic sum of money to me, which would help my channel's development. And in exchange, you will get the early access to my videos. So basically, you're gonna see them earlier than everybody else can see them. Just a little bonus, you know. Helge Arnold Fossmo, the main character of today's true crime video. He was born in the year 1971 in a place called Kristinehamn in Sweden. He was the youngest kid from 5, and his family actually originated in Norway. So his family wasn't very religious, but at one point Helge joined Mission Covenant Church of Sweden's youth group, and in some sources it was described that he became a real Christian at the age of 12. At the age of 17, Fossmo met a woman who will later become his first wife. Her name was Helene Johansson, and they met while she was working in a cafe that was more targeted towards Christian youth. In the year 1989, Fossmo joined Kristinehamn Pentecostal church, and also his future wife Helena was a member of that church, so they kind of bonded over that. After graduation of school, he moved to Karlstad to become a science teacher, but very soon he dropped out of the school. In the spring of 1993, Fossmo was involved with Jaspis. In Kristinehamn, there was a small group inspired by Ulf Ekman's Livets Ord, which is part of the Word of Faith movement. For your information, Livets Ord is a Swedish idealist foundation, free congregation and megachurch, which is based in Uppsala, Sweden, and was founded in the year 1983. Interestingly enough, Mr. Ekman left Livets Ord in the year 2014 to become Catholic. So it's kind of like a red flag. Why would a leader do that? You know, just saying. However, after a couple of months in this Jaspis, he decided that he's gonna leave it and again joined Pentecostal church. And there he started to work as a youth pastor. Now, year 1993 will be very important in this story because the year 1993 is the year when Helge Fossmo would meet a woman that would change his views and his life and this story in general. So he would meet a woman named Åsa Waldo, and she was visiting Kristinehamn as a visiting pastor to have some sermons in the Pentecostal church. When Fossmo met Åsa Waldo for the first time, he was completely awestruck by her. And actually, Åsa later remembered in her interviews that Fossmo told her that she is the only woman that he actually wants to listen to. And as I mentioned, she was there in Kristinehamn to have a couple of visiting sermons, and every time Fossmo was there meeting her, listening to her, and also was very much willing to bond with her and mingle with her. So you must be now wondering what was so special about this Åsa Waldo woman. So let's look into her, since her influence is also very important in today's story in relation to Knutby murders. So Åsa Waldo was born in the year 1965. She had 3 sisters, and her mother was not very religious woman, although Åsa kinda was very hooked on religion. So she graduated from 1 year's Bible school in a Pentecostal church, and soon after she started to work in this church as a children's pastor. But she had to leave this position because of her actions and because she got divorced from her husband. So after that, she moves to Knutby, where like the main events of the main murders of today's video will take place. Now, when Åsa moves to Knutby, she starts to behave, if you understand what I'm saying here. So first of all, she moved in, not in her own like house or apartment, she moved in into like local family's house. So this family kind of accepted her to live there. I believe while she was looking for her own place. And in this family, they had a son named Patrick, who was 10 years younger than Åsa, but this did not stop Åsa and Patrick from falling in love with each other. And soon after, in the year 1994, they both get married. And so Åsa, after getting married, after a while, gets a part-time job in the local Knutby Pentecostal church. And as it appears, she knew the pastor in that congregation, and this is how I suppose she got the job. She knew this pastor from her Bible school that I mentioned before, where she had to do like 1 month studies or so. Important about Knutby congregation is that it was established in the year 1921 as Philadelphia congregation. It happened during an important period. It was the time called the Pentecostal Revival, which was promoted by a man named Levi Petrus. It appears Waldo was the granddaughter of Petrus's successor, Willis Sove. But as I said at the beginning, Åsa's mother was not very religious, but I guess Åsa kind of stuck to religion, and this kind of past related to this Pentecostal revival movement made her even more motivated to work in a church. Also, important thing that I should mention is that when Åsa got into this religion thing, she was also very much influenced by Ulf Ekman, the man that I mentioned before, who is like part of this mega church influenced movement called Livets Ord. So this is something similar between Fosmo and Åsa Waldo, and I guess that was also another thing that made them bond even more. Waldo's authority in this Pentecostal congregation grew with every day and every month, and with time she comes out with an announcement that she is the bride of Christ personified. As a self-proclaimed bride of Christ, Åsa Waldo expected that she would be taken away before the rapture, in a manner reminiscent of the assumption of the Mary, and there she would be united with her bridegroom. Now, in my opinion, if the previous red flags were kind of tiny in her life, then this last one about the bride of Christ is a huge red flag. As I said, Åsa's authority in the church grew, and at one point she announced that she's going to be touring throughout the Sweden. And she would visit like Pentecostal churches, give some sermons, and she would also invite young people to follow her, move to Knutby, and like live there together with like her and the congregation, and like pray God and everything's gonna be fine. For your information, Knutby is a really small kind of village type place that's located in Uppsala County, and there's nothing so much to do. So I guess this kind of starts to smell a bit like a cult, where the leader asks everyone just to follow her, move to a secluded place, and let's just pray and be happy and follow me and everything's gonna be fine. I don't know, this really starts to smell like a real cult for me. Now that we know all of this like background about Åsa Waldo, we have to go back to the moment when during this tour she stopped by in Kristinehamn to have those like visiting sermons in Pentecostal church. As I said, there she met Fosmo, he got completely crazy, and she invited him to follow her and also move to Knutby. And believe it or not, in the year 1997, Fosmo and his wife and 2 kids moved to Knutby. And soon after they moved to Knutby, Fosmo welcomes also the 3rd child into their family. And another very interesting fact is that they moved into a house straight by the house where Åsa Waldo lived. And so after moving in Knutby, Fosmo spends a lot of time with Waldo. They meet each other, they pray, they also talk about the expansion of the church and congregation, and not only, but we will get to that a little bit later. I guess you already saw this coming, but wait for it. And also during these meetings, Fosmo would tell to Waldo that if there was a bride of Christ here on the earth, then this bride would definitely be also Waldo. And she definitely liked to hear it. Soon after Fosmo starts to work as a pastor, he was famous for his unorthodox approach. He was different. He often talked about taboo subjects like sex. Fosmo and Waldo started a month-long training school which was held 3 times a year, and it attracted young Christians from all over Sweden. But while Fosmo was talking about morality, which of course also includes being dedicated to your own family, to your wife, to your children, he would also have affairs. And yes, he was cheating on his wife. He tried to hide it, but of course, his wife Helen was not an idiot, and she started to suspect something dirty there. And you know, his mistress, yes, you guessed it, it was Osvaldo. Now, Fosmo's obsession with Waldo grew, and at one point he decided that since she's the bride of the Christ, she has to have like a proper wedding ceremony. But it was not him who proposed, because we know whose bride she is, you know? On March 29th, year 1999, he was the only person present at the ceremony where Osvaldo was betrothed to Jesus. She became the bride of Christ and also assumed a new name, Tirsa. And it gets crazier. Now he decides that he will like let Jesus through himself and do his like husband's duty to her. So he was like sexually pleasing her with his hands. It just makes me angry because, you know, these people were working with youth, with children quite a lot. And nobody knew what kind of things they were doing. And this is only beginning, you know, believe me, just keep on watching this video. The story just like will blow your mind. And around this time, some really strange things start to happen in Knutby. People start to die. On December 18th, year 1999, Fosmo and his wife Helena got stomach flu. It was nothing like extraordinary because many people in Knutby got it, so maybe they just met somebody who already had it and then like picked up the disease, and now they had the stomach flu. So they felt very terrible in the morning, vomiting, running to the bathroom, and like they couldn't do anything. After a while, nanny steps into their house because remember they have like 3 kids, so it was wise to have a nanny. She brings some food, so she gives to Helena and Fosmo some Coke and some food. They eat a bit, but nothing really helps. They just keep on running to the bathroom. And so they go back to the bed and fall asleep. After a while, Fosmo is woken up by a neighbor who just like dropped in to check on the couple. How are they feeling? So he just like wakes the Fosmo up and says like, hey, but where's your wife? Isn't she supposed to be in the bed with you now, sleeping and getting well? Fosmo's like, oh my God, yes, where's my wife? Maybe she's in the bathroom, you know, she might be like throwing up or something. So he runs to the bathroom, the door is locked. He gets stressed, he starts to knock and call for her, but there's no answer. He breaks the door and runs into the bathroom and sees his wife lying in the bathroom with the head down, and there's a wound in her head and she's bleeding. Fosmo really gets panicked. So he screams, he shouts, he runs to his neighbors to ask for help. They perform CPR, call ambulance, but unfortunately they did not save Helena. She was 27 years when she passed away, and she left behind 3 children. After examining the body, it was determined that she had drowned after she had received an injury in her head. In her system, they found a toxic concentration of painkillers. And now the investigation of Helena's death was so weird. I don't know what was the thinking behind the investigators or who influenced who, but it was ruled out that this was an accident. So you understand, it really didn't look like an accident because she had an injury at the back of her head, and the way how Fosmo acted after her death, I think it proves that he is the guilty one, and we will see that throughout the story. So let me just explain Phosmos' actions after his wife died. Now, first of all, the weird thing is that those painkillers that Helena overdosed were actually prescribed to Phosmo, not to her. There was a hole in her head, and the investigators didn't even bother to investigate what kind of object caused this injury. Was it because she fell backwards? But where did she fall? Where is the exact spot where she hit the head? Or maybe there was some kind of blunt object and somebody hit on her head. We don't know anything about that. How can investigators not even look into that? And then there was this thing, like after her death, there was an autopsy. And Phosmo decided to send these autopsy results to Helena's parents. And he did some corrections together with Osa in this autopsy document. He took out the part where it says that she overdosed painkillers. And moreover, which even more adds to the suspense, is that Phosmo together with Osa cleaned the house completely and took out all of Helena's stuff out of the house soon after her death. If it's not getting rid of evidence, then what is it? You tell me. After this death, Phosmo in public seemed very devastated. He'd been seen crying in a couple of occasions and he looked really, really bad, like a real grieving husband. But don't be fooled by this sleazy pastor. You see, the months leading to his wife's death, he already started to develop some romantic relationship with a woman named Alexandra. And Alexandra was Osa Waldo's little sister. I suppose they met each other in Osa Waldo's house because remember, he spent a lot of time there with her. And Phosmo is such a sleazy guy. He goes to Osa Waldo and tells her a story that, I had a dream, and in this dream, I was actually marrying your youngest sister, Alexandra. Osa Waldo is certainly not happy to hear that, and I suppose she might be also a little bit jealous, considering that he gave her this diamond ring and is calling her the bride of Christ and always putting her higher than the rest of the women and people in general. But nothing stops Phosmos and Alexandra's relationship, and in the year 2000 they get married, and it happens 1 month after his first wife Helena died. And Alexandra, I didn't mention this before, is only 20 years old. So it's basically almost like grooming. And after the wedding, Alexandra moves in Phosmos' house. The house where just a month ago, there was a dead woman in the bathtub. Now, Phosmo does not stop there. After getting married to 20-year-old Alexandra, he gets his first mistress. Her name is Sara Svensson, and she's 23 years old. So how did they meet? Well, Sara and her husband were visiting Phosmo as their pastor because, they needed some counseling. They had some problems in their marriage, so they decided to go to pastor and talk things out so that maybe they will save their marriage. Soon after these meetups with the pastor, the husband of Sarah's understands that Phosmo is always favoring Sarah in these sessions and kind of looking at her in a special way. He's not really a fan of this, but he cannot do anything about it. And it seems like the game that Phosmo is playing with Sarah really worked, because after a while Sarah confesses to Phosmo that she's starting to develop some warm feelings towards him. Phosmo receives this from Sarah with a huge smile. He's satisfied. And a little bit of time passes and they have some kind of praying session with Sarah, and Phosmo turns around and tells Sarah that he also has some warm feelings towards her. And if they have something between both of them, that is the will of God. And after saying this, he suggests that they should probably make their bond stronger by performing certain acts. He suggests they should have sex. And he tells to Sarah that it's not about sex, it's about sending a message to God. After this, Phosmo asks Sarah a very inconvenient question. He asks her if she would be willing to kill if God would ask her to do so. Sarah is a little bit like frightened to reply to this, and she also feels very uncomfortable, but at the end she says yes. I mean, that's a man that she loves and she wants to please him, and they have this like emotional bond. So all in all, we can assume that during this time, Fosmo has a wife, Alexandra, with whom he's sleeping. Maybe he's also sleeping still with Åsa Waldo and also sleeping with Sarah Svensson. With time, Fosmo's authority grew in the church, and people start to believe that he is the closest living being to God that they have ever met. And he uses this and manipulates his congregation even further. He tells them that he can predict the future. He said that God gave him some kind of like visions, and he can tell that soon he will get very seriously ill and go to hospital. Not that a person can fake this, but okay. And you won't believe it, time passes and Fosmo gets into the hospital with some serious disease. I couldn't find what kind of disease he had, but well, that's a fact. He's in the hospital, he feels very, very bad, and he needs a lot of help and care. While he is lying in the hospital with high fever and feeling very bad, he asks Sarah to sit with him and care for him. Not his wife Alexandra, not Åsa Waldo, who is like the guru, the bride of Christ. He asks for Sarah to do this. Of course, her husband is not very happy. They already had a rocky marriage before they started to visit this priest for these sessions. Now he wants her to sit with him 24/7 in the hospital. But she doesn't listen to her husband. She goes to hospital and sits with Fosmo 24/7 as he needs. When he goes out of the hospital, he announces that the spiritual battle has not ended, and in order to continue that, he needs Sarah besides him. And this is when Sarah moves in with Fosmo in his house. So what happens is, you already know that Fosmo is married to Alexandra and she lives in the house. Sarah moves in, and his wife Alexandra is supposed to move out of Fosmo's bedroom to the guest room so that Sarah can live now with him in the bedroom. And Alexandra every night is now living in the guest room and listening to how Fosmo is having sex with Sarah constantly. And Sarah is having sex with Fosmo only because he convinced her that this is part of the spiritual battle that they're fighting. How convenient. I don't know. And the worst thing is that the congregation didn't really know what was happening inside Fosmo's house. They believed that Sarah moved in to work as a nanny because remember, from the first marriage, Fosmo still had those 3 children. So during the time of 2001 up to 2003, Fosmo makes sure that Sarah is completely under his control. He makes sure that Sarah divorces her husband, moves in with him forever as his spiritual wife, and also convinces her that she's a complete sinner and she has to work really hard if she wants to get into heaven after her death. Basically, he starts a major brainwashing project with Sarah. Fosmo also does the following, like a sleazy man. He positions Sarah in front of the congregation as an example of a real sinner because she was kind of trying to tempt him, a married man, into having a sexual relationship. We all know that they already have it, but he wanted to like show that Sarah is a sinner and in this way probably convince her even more that she needs to be saved. She needs to do all of the things that Fosmo is telling her. And now it is year 2003, November the 3rd, night of horror again in the Fosmo's house. Sarah wakes up, takes a hammer, goes to Alexandra's room, the wife's room, and hits her in the head a couple of times with a hammer. She manages to wake up and fight off and survives. Now, the next part gets me really angry because Fosmo does not announce this attack to the police. Instead, he tells Sarah to leave Knutby forever, and in exchange, he will not inform police about this attack. So basically, the whole congregation knew about this attack, and the police didn't have a clue that something like this actually happened again in Fosmo's house. Another attack to his already second wife. Sarah moves out of Knutby and she moves in with her father. He lives outside Knutby, but not so far from this village. And soon after, she starts to receive messages on her phone, allegedly from God himself. Strangely enough, God is not shaming her for this attack. God is shaming her for not finishing the job of killing Alexandra. These messages from the God are very frequent and kind of pushing Sarah towards finishing the job, because otherwise she will never get to heaven. A little bit later, also another name appears in these messages, Daniel Linde. So Lindes lived in the neighboring house of Phosmos. So it was like a married couple, Annette and Daniel. And when Sarah left the village, Annette became the next Sarah, the next mistress with whom Phosmo was sleeping. Daniel, the husband, was really fighting for his wife, and in this way he became an enemy to Phosmo. So now he was sending messages to Sarah as God and telling that she has to kill Alexandra and she has to kill Daniel Linde. After months of pressure, Sarah finally gives in. And she goes to Stockholm, buys a gun, and she finally starts to put the plan into action in January 2004. Sarah jumps into her father's old Volvo and starts her trip towards Knutby. At 3:30 a.m., she receives a call from Phosmo. He asks how Sarah feels. She says that she's a bit anxious, but she's gonna do it, and she's quite close to the village already. Phosmo says, encourages her that you can do this. The village is quite quiet, so you shouldn't be anxious. It will be easy. And of course, he reminds that this is how she can be saved and how she will get in the heaven. Sarah arrives around 500 meters away from Phosmo's house at around 4 a.m. She puts pantyhose on her head. I guess she cut also some holes to see where she's going. And she goes through the snow straight to Phosmo's house. The door is open conveniently because the night before, Helge Phosmo, together with his wife Alexandra, they had a fight and somehow they broke this handle. How convenient, you know? And so it was very easy for Sarah to enter the house through this broken back door. Sarah goes upstairs. She already knows where everything is since she had lived there before. She passes the children's room and she doesn't really know that Phosmo is actually hiding there, and he's kind of listening if Sarah is succeeding in what she's supposed to do. So Sarah opens the bedroom door, makes sure that Alexandra is really lying in the bed. She shoots once. She manages to hit her hip. Alexandra is screaming, and the next shot is in her head, and she falls unconscious. Sarah runs away, very anxious, very stressed. She runs out of the house, stays there for a while, takes some breaths, and then thinks, but what if I didn't really manage to finish this job completely? I didn't check if she's dead. So she goes back again in the house, sees that Alexandra is indeed sleeping in the puddle of blood, and she's indeed dead. And then she's kind of convinced that the main mission of today is completed and she can go away with a calm heart that only one task is left. The next stop, as promised to God, is to Linda's house. So she breaks into the house, knocks on the door, and the bedroom door is opened by Daniel Linde. She shoots in the chest and then into his face. Luckily enough, it's not lethal, but he falls on the back right on the ground. Then suddenly she hears that there is someone else in Linde's house. She knew that Annette, the wife, who is also the mistress to Phosmo, is not home, and she's a little bit confused, but she still runs away. Well, what she didn't know is that Lindes were sharing the house with another family, the Frankers. So the husband, Samuel Franker, hearing this noise, he ran into Daniel Lindes' room and he sees him lying on the floor with all of these injuries. He immediately calls emergency. Daniel could not really speak a lot, but still he could say something. He also calls, of course, the main pastor of the village. He calls Phosmo and says that there has been a murder in the city. Maybe you want to come and support us. While Sarah is already back in her car, she texts Phosmo saying that she is sick, which is the code message confirming that she has managed to fulfill the task of God. And Fosmo reads this message, switches off the phone, and this phone will never be turned on again. Sarah dashes out of the village, seeing a lot of police and ambulance cars. That's a scene that probably never had been seen before in this small and silent corner of Sweden. What happens is Fosmo arrives to the crime scene in Linde's house. And when the ambulance takes away Daniel Linde, Fosmo, as this caring pastor, is allowed to go with him to the hospital as a support. And before they leave, Daniel still manages to utter his words to the police and describe how the attacker looked. And Fosmo also told Samuel Franker to go and check his house because he has a wife there and maybe she's scared of what's happening. How smart, because this means he's kind of telling that when I left the house, my wife was still alive and still sleeping, kind of making sure that everybody gets this impression. But the wife is already dead even before Daniel was attacked, as we all know. 5:07 a.m. roadblocks are set up by police, and just a minute later they stop a black Volvo with a young woman driving. But since they're looking for a male suspect at the beginning, Sarah is allowed to leave. Meanwhile, Samuel Franker enters the Fosmo's house to check on Alexandra, the pastor's wife, and he's devastated and surprised to see that Alexandra has been shot, almost in the same manner as the neighbor Daniel Linde. He immediately calls the police and ambulance. They don't have to go so far since it's a neighboring house, and he informs that there's another death here. The investigators arrive at Fosmo's house, and one of the investigators starts to feel really suspicious about this because 4 years ago he entered this house to sort out another event, the death of Fosmo's wife, Helena. And now he starts to put things together and feel, there is something about this Fosmo guy. While Fosmo was on the way to ambulance together with Daniel Linde, he already had become a suspect. And after a while, he's taken in for interrogation. So the police interrogate him. They also ask to give his mobile phone, but there is no sign of contacts with Sarah, nothing that could point out to him planning this together with Sarah. In fact, this was a different phone. Fosmo used another phone for communication with Sarah, but that phone actually had never been found up to nowadays. During this interrogation, the police informs him that his wife, Alexandra, had also been found dead. She had died, dude. She had died, and she had been shot in the same way as Daniel Linde was injured. Fosmo makes a huge scene. He cries, he's desperate, but this desperation changes quite swiftly, and he starts to point fingers towards Sarah Svensson. And he also brings up the story of how Sarah attacked Alexandra one night with a hammer. You remember, it was not reported to the police, but the whole congregation knew about that. How convenient. But the police had nothing on Fosmo, so they let him go. However, they put some taps on his mobile phone just in case he decides to contact Sarah, or maybe something else happens that could help to tie him to this case. Meanwhile, the police find Sarah in her father's house. She was not even hiding from the police, and she also confesses that she did it, and she was the only sole mastermind behind all of these murders. And also some interesting things start to come up from the mobile phone of Fosmos. Remember, police put some devices on it so that they can listen to the conversations. And one of these conversations is between Fosmo and Annette Linde, the wife of Daniel Linde, who had been shot and now lying in the hospital. There she says to Fosmo that she hates to go to the hospital. She hates to take care of her husband. She's not really bothered about the fact that he's really feeling very bad. All she cares is to be together with Fosmo. So it's like a sign that Annette Linde is also kind of brainwashed the same manner as Sarah was. And also in these conversations, they found something really weird. Fosmo was talking to other congregation members and talking about how they should pray so that the police doesn't link Fosmo or Waldo or anyone else to this case to these shootings. Why would he say something like that? Meanwhile, Sarah is still interrogated by the police to understand all of the details, and they take in Sarah's mobile phone, and there they can see that Sarah has tried to delete all of the call histories and all of the messaging histories with Fosmo, or God, as she said, because she told the police that she had been receiving messages from God. And when the police take the phone, they notice that there are still a couple of messages left that she didn't manage to delete, but those messages just signify on how she was manipulated, but don't tell the whole story. So they cannot really consider this as a real evidence for the case to tie Fosmo. And this makes things quite complicated. With those few messages that Sarah didn't manage to delete, it was easy to understand how Fosmo was manipulating Sarah. There were also similar messages from a known number with the same meaning, also kind of from God, persuading her to kill. Sarah claimed that these ones came from another God's number. However, the police tracked the movement of the phone number owner, and it appears that the locations were the same as Fosmo's at that time. Sarah is confronted with this, like about the locations, and they ask her maybe it was Fosmo and not God who was sending these messages. And after 6 months of interrogations and talking to Sarah, she finally starts to speak up and tell the real truth, how Fosmo was manipulating her throughout the life and how everything actually happened. But at the end of the day, in the trial, it was just Sarah's word against Fosmo's word. And who would you believe? There is no evidence, like real evidence that would show that Fosmo was really involved, just like circumstantial evidence. This story has quite a good ending. You see, a couple of weeks before the trial, some computer company managed to crack the phone and retrieve all of the deleted messages in Sarah's phone. And that was a scene that the police was not expecting to see. Thousands of messages, manipulation, brainwashing from Fosmo's side. Everything was now clear how everything happened. There was no way back. Fosmo was involved. In the year 2004, Helge Fosmo was convicted of solicitation of murder and sentenced to 24 years in prison with the possibility to parole. Helge Fosmo was released in the year 2022, so quite recently. I couldn't find what he's doing now, but I truly hope that he has the life that he deserves after this. Sarah Svensson was convicted of murder and attempted murder. She was pronounced mentally ill and sentenced for indefinite stay in a mental institution. She was released in the year 2011. As for Waldo, with whom the pastor was obsessed and started his holy horror journey, well, although she was close to Fosmo, she was never under investigation, and there was no evidence linking her to this case. Hard to believe that she was never involved. Maybe she was not directly involved in this like brainwashing with Sarah and everything, because also her little sister was killed, Alexandra. But I think she was why Fosmo actually became like this. Like she encouraged to become this like godlike figure. Because of her influence, this happened like this. I'm not blaming anything. I'm just like talking out loud about how I feel about this situation. But anyways, Oswaldo is no saint at all. In the year 2020, she and other pastors from Knutby congregation were convicted of an assault towards church members. She got away with like 120 hours of community service, but still it just shows what kind of person she is. Like, why would you abuse your congregation members? She has also become some kind of like celebrity. She has participated in a lot of like documentaries and TV shows telling about Knutby murders. She has released CDs, opened a spa and stuff, like always on the spotlight like a star. I don't know many details about her life right now, but what is known is that she has changed her name and has remained a free woman, living, I suppose, a normal life like nothing happened. Friends, I will put a full stop here. It was quite a long video and it was quite a lot of digging into this case. Honestly, I'm quite obsessed with these cult cases because I really, really don't understand how people can so easily brainwash and influence other people. I know that they are attacking those people when they are in a very vulnerable state, which is terrible. But still, like, even when I'm very vulnerable, I don't think anyone could convince me to do some horrible things, like, for example, commit a murder. I don't know. Like, this is very fascinating topic for me. Anyways, let me know your thoughts about this case. Have you heard about it? And let's meet each other in the comment section. As I said, one of my New Year's resolutions was to talk less about unrelated stuff. So I'm just gonna tell you, have a lovely day and see you in my next video.